Welcome back. Today we are making this adorable polar bear cake. So this is part of my animal cake series, which I've been having so much fun making. This cake is made with fluffy vanilla cake layers. I made six 6-inch cake layers and then one 4-inch cake layer, and I'm trimming them down with a serrated knife just to make it easier to get that polar bear shape just right. After giving my buttercream a quick stir because it had been sitting, I added a dab onto my cake drum here. If this is a 10-inch cake drum that's about a half an inch thick, and I'm going to stack my cake layers onto it. I also decided to add some rainbow sprinkles between each cake layer just to make it more fun when we cut in. And I've placed my cake layers a little bit back on my cake board so it's not perfectly centered, just to make sure that I have enough space for my polar bear's arms and legs. So I'm stacking my cake layers that I've trimmed in this tapered shape, and I'm topping those 3 cake layers with my 4-inch cake layer. At this point, I like to insert a bubble tea straw. You could also use a wooden cake dowel into the cake just to keep my layers in place while I add on my crumb coat. So I'm smoothing this out with my small acetate sheet, and I chilled the cake for about 10 minutes in the freezer until that frosting was firm to the touch. I like to do this in stages and then kind of add my second part of the cake, which is the head of our polar bear, just because it has a lot more stability for building once it's been chilled. So I prefer to then slide my remaining cake layers down over my bubble tea straw, but you also could wait to insert the bubble tea straw until you've stacked all of your cake layers. It really just comes down to whatever you prefer. Once my cake layers were stacked, I added a crumb coat over my polar bear's head with a very gentle touch to make sure that it wasn't moving my cake layers around too much. I then smoothed out my frosting with my acetate sheet and chilled this cake again. And while we waited for our frosting to firm up, I used some cake decorating Rice Krispies to shake my polar bear's hind legs, some thinner front legs, and then I also made a little tail. So your Rice Krispies should still be a little bit warm after you've shaped them, and I like to press them into place and kind of hold them against the cake to make sure that they're equally shaped and that they're proportionate. Once they are on the cake, I like to cover them in a thin layer of buttercream just to make it easier to pipe our fur on later. And once they're covered, it's time to add our fondant details. So I cut out some kind of salmon colored foot pads, eyes, nose, mouth, and then of course some ears. Even though I actually press my toothpicks into my fondant ears when I make them, I insert them separately into the cake just to make the ears easier to slide into place. I'm using a small grass tip here to pipe some fur onto my cake, and as you can see, I have a paper towel wrapped around my piping bag. If your hands run hot or your hands start to make the frosting a little bit too warm and too soft, I recommend doing this. It can help minimize the transfer of heat from your hands into the frosting. I also recommend taking breaks. This takes a long time and it'll help you avoid any hand cramps and also help keep your frosting consistency nice and firm. If you notice that your cake is starting to lose some of the definition of the arms or the legs, I like to take an offset spatula and just kind of draw a line around them, as you can see I just did. It really helps them stand out and keep their shape. So after I piped on all my fur, I noticed that my polar bear's muzzle almost was inverted and I needed to add on a little bit more frosting. So I just piped some on, smoothed it out with my acetate sheet, and then added back into place my nose and my mouth. The only thing left to pipe was the fur on my little polar bear's ears, and once I had covered both sides pretty equally, our polar bear cake was all ready to go. I've started adding party hats onto my animal cakes because they're party animals, and so of course I added a matching hat onto this. I also painted my polar bear's eyes and nose with a little bit of vodka just to make them shine. You could also use a clear extract like almond extract or lemon extract. So I took a moment to just admire my polar bear cake, and then it was time to cut in and see what those cake layers tasted like. I'm happy to report they were absolutely delicious, and it was worth cutting into this adorable little cake. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. The full recipe is up on Chelsweets.com, and I'll include the link in the video description below. So until next time, happy baking!